And we are live. JT here. Welcome to The Huddle. The Huddle is where I sit down with successful people from the world of sport and coaching. It's to learn more about their journey to greatness. Why do I have these conversations? Because success always leaves clues. I want to take a moment to thank you. Whether you are watching on Facebook or on YouTube, whether you're listening to the audio on the podcasts, thank you so much for being here with me and my special guest today. And here's my friendly reminder to you. The mind is like a parachute. It works best when it's wide open. So my challenge to you is to go all in on this conversation, to remove any distractions and get laser focused on the here and the now. And I guarantee you will gain a valuable nugget of wisdom that will not only help you succeed in sport, but more importantly, in the game of life. I've been looking forward to my conversation with my special guest. I think it was probably almost a year ago where we first connected, I think on LinkedIn. And we had the opportunity to meet there. And again, one of the blessings of social media allows us to connect with people we might not otherwise be able to. And then we had the opportunity to meet in person at the U16 Eastern Regional Tournament in Sackville. And I was just it's been interesting to see how our journeys, although different, there are some parallels there. So I really wanted to bring him on. My guest in the huddle today is the Director of Football Operations with Football New Brunswick. My guest in the huddle today is Jon Wilkinson. How are you today, brother?
I'm doing great, JT. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, definitely, brother. And before we get kicked off, pun intended, I just want to take a moment to count my blessings. And it's interesting that you mentioned those words, before we actually hit live. And for me, counting my blessings is a daily practice. Some days I do it better than others, but I do find the days I'm most diligent with that practice, that those days typically feel a little bit lighter, filled with a little bit more calm and peace. And I'm a big believer that the biggest blessing you can give to anyone is your time and energy. So thank you again for blessing me with some of your time and energy here today, brother.
My pleasure.
Absolutely. So one of the first things I like to do in the huddle is to remind people that life is a game and games are supposed to be fun. So I'm curious. I had a teaching colleague and a coaching colleague who said, we all have these things that make us unique and different, so celebrate it. So I'm curious, what's an interesting fact that maybe a lot of people don't know about you that you'd be open to sharing with our community today?
Okay. Well, to be honest, it's funny. I always see myself as a happy-go-lucky guy, but apparently, and when I've been involved in sport, my first impression has not been that. A lot of people have approached me after they've got to know me and been, man, I thought you were kind of a jerk when we met, very stern and cold. But I'm a very happy-go-lucky guy. I'm a silly guy. I like to have fun. I like to laugh, and definitely not stern and cold. I think I have a bit of a competitive nature, and I think that competitive nature sometimes gets confused as being a little cold. So a little fun fact about me, I'm a pretty fun guy, we'll say.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I love that because it just had this image like that fiery competitive side of you. I think your picture where I remember when you got announced as a U16 head coach for Football New Brunswick, there was that fire, that in-game picture that sort of caught the essence of that fire in your belly. So I love how you mentioned it's kind of you have that competitive side of you, but then you also have that fun, playful side as well.
Oh, for sure. I'm when I'm on the field, especially coaching, I think it's changed a little bit as a coach.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always having fun on the field. I'm always laughing. I find, making jokes with the players is a great way to connect with them. So I don't think, at least I don't hope any of my players think that I'm a cold and stern coach, but I think nowadays people see me more as maybe a fun guy right away. So
yeah. Okay. Hey, it's that beauty of time and place, right? Great reminder.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I'm curious, again, your journey's, it's been unique, right? You're an Ontario guy, a Northern Ontario guy, and you played in the OUA, and then you, similar to me, spent some time in education, and then you took the road less traveled and you headed out east, and you had this opportunity to become the director of football operations with Football New Brunswick. So it's very evident that sport has played an important role for you in your life. So I'm
Oh,
curious,
huge. Yeah.
what has been a life lesson you've taken from sport? Again, I know there's many that you find yourself still applying to different areas of your life today.
Oh, well, the biggest one is it's okay to fail. And in fact, failure is a part of the journey. Um,
Mm,
and I've come to peace with this, but throughout my young adulthood, I failed a lot. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've screwed up a lot. Whether it was back when I was in university, and I don't think I've mentioned this to you. I did some time with the military as well. I've fallen flat on my face quite a few times, and for a long time, I kind of wasn't able to move past that. What really helped me when I met my fiance now, uh, she has this line where she says the universe tends to unfold as it should, and I've really bought into that. And when I look back at all my failures now and all those mistakes I made, I take peace in it now because it's gotten me to where I am today. I'm in a job that I love. I'm with a person I love. I have a daughter now, and if it wasn't for all those mistakes, all that pain, all those troubles, I wouldn't
mm,
be here today. I might be in a job I don't like. I might be living somewhere I don't like. So it's definitely been an interesting, confusing, and long journey.
yeah.
But I love where I am right now. And so again, the biggest lesson I've taken from this is it's okay to fail, and you know 99.9% of people are going to fail at some point throughout their journey, and
Yeah.
that's supposed to happen. That's okay. You're supposed to learn from those. You're supposed to grow from those things, and then and one day hopefully get to where you want to be, and then you can reflect on those and kind of come to peace with it.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing and opening up. It was interesting as you share, a couple things I sort of heard there was one, this idea of, I know you talk about mistakes, and I love I'll sort of reference on Maxwell Maltz quote, who wrote a great book, Psycho Cybernetics, and he referenced this idea of you make mistakes, you are not a mistake. So I love that idea of sort of just understanding that mistakes are part of the game of life.
Oh,
And
for
and I
sure.
also love how you talked about, it sounds like your fiance is kind of like that rock in your life, that sense of that calm and peace. And sort of as we as coaches often talk about, we encourage our players to trust the process. So it sounds like she's
Right.
been a rock for you that way.
Oh, big time. I can't think Marissa has been there for all the lows and all the highs, and has really helped me kind of when I reflect on my past, and maybe when I talk about some of those events, and maybe with a bit of spite in my voice, and she's helped me move past those and kind of heal. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
definitely my rock for sure.
Okay. Um, you were mentioning this idea of mistakes, right? And I think
Right.
that, again, you've spent time in education, and it's interesting because we've sort of been programmed and conditioned to believe there's this illusion of perfection, right? And I think it starts from a very young age, just like, we base our, self-worth, our value on an arbitrary market of 0 to 100, right?
Yes.
So I'm curious from you, those mistakes, right? You said over the course of your journey, you've learned that these mistakes have actually helped you become a more strong and powerful, version of yourself. Was there anything in particular that you kind of felt like in hindsight was like a blessing for you to kind of go through that?
Yeah, for sure. So I would definitely say, so when I joined the military as a reservist in 2013. After a couple of years with the reserves, I was in Ottawa at the time.
Mm,
I transferred over the regular forces, and that brought me out to New Brunswick. So I had a choice to either go to or not Brandon, sorry, be Shiloh, Manitoba, or Moncton, New Brunswick. And I figured Shiloh was kind of similar to Northern Ontario, and I wanted to go on an adventure. So I said, let's go to Armagh, let's go check out New Brunswick. Um, Long story short, my time in the military was not phenomenal. During this is the silliest way to get hurt in the military. During there's like this kind of national tournament where all these units send athletes to a tournament. I was playing indoor soccer as a goalie. I took a shot to the face, fell down, got a pretty bad concussion. Um, that on top of some of the concussions I had, previously from football and some other sports, it was a pretty bad one, and I wasn't able to continue to do what I had signed up for in the military. So I was in the infantry, and I was kind of relegated to a desk and doing some administration work. And, you know, it really felt like this colossal, terrible failure that, I wasn't able to do what I wanted to do. I thought I was finally settled in a career path. I was in this new place. I was making friends, and things took a turn for the worse after this head injury. And I thought, dramatically, life is over. I don't have the energy to make another move. I don't have the energy to jump to another career. And all of a sudden, this whole journey of leaving Ottawa and coming out to New Brunswick felt like a massive mistake. I felt I was stuck. I had a card, to make payments on. I was, financially tied down kind of in this area. And I was stuck now in a job that I was not enjoying at all. So, and thankfully I was able to kind of take advantage of some of the services offered in the military, and, some cognitive behavior therapy and some group talk and that kind of stuff. And I was able pretty quick after that to realize that, okay, this is not the end of the world. It's another hurdle, right? And, I'm going to get over this hurdle. And, now looking back on it, I definitely did. And this whole great big mistake that I thought this journey to New Brunswick turns out to be the greatest move of my life. Because, like you said, I did some time in education after. So right before I did that, I met my fiance Marissa, and I had decided I was going to move back to Ontario at this point. So okay, I'm going back to North Bay. I'm leaving the military, and then I meet Marissa smack dab in the middle of the pandemic, and I go, okay, well, I guess I'm going to stay in New Brunswick, see how this goes. And all of a sudden, I'm like, I need a job. And her father's a teacher, she's a teacher. And she had mentioned, well, why don't you try teaching? I don't have my B.Ed, but French is my first language, so that's a pretty big in here in New Brunswick. So I ended up getting hired on as a teacher, and that eventually leads to where I'm working right now. So I know I said long story short, and I'm rambling here a bit, but basically, that drastic, terrible thing that happened to me that I thought was the end of the world turns out to be one of the best things that's ever happened to me.
Oh, I love it. And why I love it is, you took such great responsibility, right? And what it sounds like is you reframed, right? And it's interesting how, reframing is it's really flexing your perception muscle, right? And it's interesting that the events really were neutral, and it's real easy at times, right? To look at things through a negative lens, but you took responsibility and you flexed that perception muscle and you found, the blessing in it. So I'm curious, how big has that been for you to be able to sort of, I guess, be able to take things and then reframe them as, no, there's a lesson here. There's an opportunity to grow and become, again, that stronger, more powerful version of yourself.
Oh, massive. I would say since that big one with the military, it's really become a tool in my toolkit now. Where, and obviously I have bad days where maybe I'm not immediately analyzing stuff and trying to reframe things. But for the most part, when I get to a hurdle in life now, it's like, whoa, okay, like, let's slow down a bit. Let's really analyze what's going on. And is this really that terrible? Or can I make this work somehow? Can I kind of look at this from a different angle? See, this is where is the positive in this situation? How can I make this work for me? And, it's been great too, because this is also something I can share now with players. And when I was teaching with with my students as well, I find, with the age of the kids I was teaching, I was doing long-term supply primarily in middle school. So eventually I earned a couple contracts where I was doing, staying in the same spot for a semester. And what I noticed with kids, these, now at that age group nowadays is they get to a problem, and it's like me times 10. It's totally the end of the world. Oh, I didn't study for a test. It's a complete emotional breakdown because I'm not prepared. And I really enjoyed, and I felt like I was doing good work being able to share my lesson, or sorry, my story with these kids and the lessons that I've learned. I said, hey man, it's not the end of the world. This is a test. This is not going to hold you back 10 years from now. You're not even going to think about this test. Let's get through this. Let's work through this. How can we reframe this to learn from it and get better tomorrow? So it's not only has it helped me, but it's been huge for me sharing this lesson with other people as well, especially these the young people that I work with.
Yeah, no, and I love that you went there, right? Because I was going to ask you, like, this ability, because again, a lot of these foundations of being able to reframe, right, to flex that perception muscle were, I'm sure, skills that you brought up when you did some of that cognitive behavioral theory, right? That
Oh, yeah.
training is to be able to actually learn, like you said, to put some extra tools in your toolkit. So I'm curious, what have you noticed? Because again, you have seen, you've worked with kids in an educational setting. Now you're a leader at a provincial level. You are a provincial level coach. I'm curious, like, why, how has it made you a better coach? Like, let's say, was there a football specific example where you're like, okay, this tool really helped this student athlete overcome, a challenging time?
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing I've really taken from that is being able to understand that, these kids are living in different times. It's not the same times that I grew up in. There's a unique set of circumstances, a unique set of problems that they're facing. And, growing up as a millennial, uh, we had that target on our back, from older generation. Oh, you guys have it so easy, this and that and that. And that kind of really, those two things combined and saying, you know what? As much as my reflex, I want to say their problems are lesser than mine, the ones I grew up with. It's not that they're lesser, it's that they're different.
Mm.
So, being able to, and again, we talk about reframing. I'm looking at their problems now and trying to see it from their perspective. And, I can't tell you how many times it's happened where I've had a player come up to me, with issue A, B, or C. And my first initial reaction is, oh my God, that's not even a problem. But then, okay, wait a sec. Let's think about this. Okay, we live in this new age. These kids have grown up with social media since day one. Things are different nowadays, right? The influences are different. So maybe I need to look at their problems from their perspective. And then all of a sudden I'm starting to understand where they're coming from. And, trying to bridge that gap becomes a lot easier because, we're working on the same level now. So yeah, again, I'm kind of rambling on there, but I would say, in terms of a football specific example, that'd be it. Oftentimes our football players, or I'm sure it's not just football, our athletes come to us with problems that, aren't problems on the field. They're problems off the field, problems in the classroom, problems, in their social life, and one thing I pride myself on is not just creating football players, but, creating young, resilient professional human beings that are going to be ready for life after football. Because, as you and I both know, we're not in the NFL or the CFL right now. Football ends eventually, right? As a player.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good to try and equip these kids with tools that are going to help them beyond football.
Yeah, I love your share, in the fact of, I felt you sort of pulling back more of the layers of the proverbial onion, right? And it's interesting because, it's really easy, right? And it's been through, as long as humans have been on the earth, that it's easy to look back at a younger generation, go, oh, like, quote unquote, they're just soft, like they're just not resilient, right? Where it's like, no, like you said, they have different issues and challenges than we did, right? And it's just acknowledging, the facts there. And I find it an interesting time because as coaches, as leaders, as caring adults, especially in high performance sport, typically the practice of physical skills has always been a value. It's always been important. But now as we start to see that we need to empower these young people, and I think as coaches ourselves, with these skills, like to be able to develop the social skills, the emotional skills, right? Because we live in a busy, distracted world. So I'm curious, is that something that you're doing now, or are these kind of informal, or are you starting to add more of these to programming?
Yeah, for sure. So, for example, I'm the head coach for the U16 provincial team right now, and I was the running backs coach last year. And one thing I noticed with the young men we were working with on that team is not very much respect for their immediate environment. So, for example, we're using Mount Allison University as our home base, let's say, for practice, and eventually the tournament. And we're going in the dressing room, and after the kids peel out, I'm noticing there's garbage everywhere. There's these things, and a couple times I had a chat with you guys got to police yourselves. It's not up to us. I'm not mom and dad here. Like, I'm your coach for sure, but you guys need to police each other, and have respect for the air. This is not our dressing room, our field. somebody else is letting us use this. And, it's disrespectful to kind of have all this stuff and just, treat it like it's your room. So there's a lot of lessons I try to impart that aren't, okay, if we're running inside zone or something, hit the hole hard or find the crease, right? It's non-football related stuff. It's to make sure that these kids are going to be better people after I'm done with them on my team. Not, hopefully better football players too. I mean, we're playing football, that's the goal, but realistically, there are things that are bigger and more important than football. And that's definitely something I'm trying to input into programming. And one thing we did this year too, so that's, take the coach hat off and I'll put the director of football operations hat on. We partnered with Brand New Athlete, which is an incredible program. I was working with Jamie Pibaldo and his wife, Michelle Sinclair, is the CEO and founder. And they are an incredible program that so I believe it was a 5-pillar program that kind of is doing what we talked about earlier, preparing athletes for for life after sport. So I remember Michelle had told us she had gotten the idea for the business after her son was a big time football rugby player at Western. And after he was done at Western, he had this great degree, these great experience, and he wasn't able to move on. It was kind of like he was stuck in this loop. He was on the couch, not trying to find work. And, eventually, okay, well, what's going on? And it was, well, I've been an athlete for so long. My whole life has been sports, and now sports is done with me, and I don't know what to do. And, this struck a chord with me when they kind of pitched this to us. Because I said, oh my God, that was me. My whole identity since grade, I think 7 was I'm a football player. Football, football, football. That was all I cared about. That was all I did. And then all of a sudden, the football world's done with me as a player. And I struggled big time to try and find my way. Thankfully, I had the military, which kind of helped me out. And, and then I thought about my brother. He played 5 years at the University of Ottawa. He also struggled mightily once football was done with him. He really had a hard time finding his way. So it was a no-brainer for us to kind of partner with them. And I sat in on the sessions and I was blown away. They talked about, turning social media into a positive force. How can you create an identity, a positive identity for yourself on social media? Have it work for you and not you work for social media. And just, just so many life lessons they imparted on our kids. We had a couple of kids that started, they approached me like, coach, like, this feels like school. I'm not into this. Like, trust me, give it some time. At the end of the program, I think 2 of the kids that approached me to say they weren't into it, so this was the most, one of the most incredible experiences I've had in my young life. And, they're going to be giving testimonials to Brand New, and I can already tell, how much it's impacted them. So, it's a huge part with my job in Football New Brunswick is, finding ways to help these kids, not just on the field, but off the field as well.
Well, I want to take a moment to celebrate you and the leadership team at Football New Brunswick for seeing the value in this idea of developing champions for life. I know as an Ontario guy, you remember the weekly on the score how they would talk about champions for life, right, as being one of the
That's right.
Mantras of an OUA football. But it's interesting how you shared that, it's one of those things where you're giving them what they need, right? Like they think they don't want it, and they may not want it just because it's very different. But it sounds like by the end of it, with that consistency of just providing that opportunity, it sounds like they really realize, like, no, this is what I needed to learn and grow.
Oh yeah.
Right. So I'm curious with that. What are you noticing as you start to bring on some of these new and innovative of doing things? What are you noticing to football in the province? What are you noticing is shifting, maybe culture-wise?
Culture-wise, I think it's a good question. I think, recently done this. So as far as like big changes, it's, I think it's still happening, and I haven't really noticed a full-on change, but for little, there's little examples all over the place. And one of them is one of the athletes that took this program. His demeanor is completely different. Like it's like, what a young professional, like at first you look at him, when I first met him, he's like, oh, you're a classic kid, but now it's, I'm getting emails from him. They're written very differently. And, he's thinking about, prep school, and what do I need to do? Not just what do I need to do on the field, what do I need to do academically to make sure I'm able to get into the schools that are interested in me? And it's not just this. There's been a few of them now where I've noticed their demeanor, on and off the field has changed. So I'll preface this a little bit. I grew up. My old man is a big, don't make it about yourself when you do something, on the field. Like don't, oh, look at me, right? Don't do the dance. He was a big Anthony Calvillo and Ben Calhoun fan. And those guys, like, go thank your offensive lineman for making you look good, kind of thing. And so I kind of preach that a bit, but I do also understand that, again, it's different times, it's different kids, they're influenced by a lot. And, in the leagues now, the NFL, the NBA, NHL, all of them, it's all about the big show, right? It's all about the entertainment factor. So I do get that. But one thing I've noticed is, the more time I spend developing these young athletes off the field as well, the more that starts to transition on their on-field behavior. The more it's they realize, okay, I broke a running back, I break an 80-yard run. That wasn't just me. That was the big boys that made that hole for me. That was the receivers that were blocking downfield, right? And they're celebrating together. They start to realize, and we say it all the time at the start of the season, football is the ultimate team sport. Kids nod their head, right? But in terms of starting to understand that, I find when we start to develop the athlete off the field, we start to see those results on the field. They start to understand that this is a team. I need to be a part of it. I am just, 1 out of 40, 1 out of 50, whatever your roster max is. But that's been something I've noticed, and I'm very proud of that.
Mm. I love what you're sharing, because it sounds like you always look for these teachable moments, right? Where it's, as coaches, the goal is to have, one more point on the scoreboard by the end. Like that's what we're going, especially in high performance sports. Like, we all want to go there, right? But it's interesting, like you said, but when you lay a strong foundation where you actually help your student athletes, your coaches, your support staff, or just everyone around to feel a little happier, a little healthier, a little wealthier, that everything else starts to take care of itself. It almost becomes secondary, and the results they happen.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it happened with me. I remember when I first got into high school, I was like a high 60s, low 70s kind of student.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't due to, lack of skill. It was just like lack of, care. Like I was lazy, didn't want to put the effort in, didn't see why, wasn't interested. And I remember I talked to, I think it was either Queens or Waterloo. I talked to a scout. I went to a camp when I was in grade 10, I think. It was like halfway through grade 10. And, they weren't, super interested in me, but they said, you got a shot. Maybe we'd be interested in you. What's your average? So I was like 68, 71. They said, oh, forget about it. I was like, well, what do you mean? I thought you were interested in me. He said, well, buddy, and I'll never forget, they said, there's no back door into university. And I remember being like, okay, so I got to start doing some stuff. So, I'd love to say I cranked up the effort to 100%, probably brought it from like a 30 to like an 80% effort. But all of a sudden, I was a mid-80s student, and that's all it took was, that a bit more commitment, a bit more effort, a bit more organization, time management. And, it wasn't that hard. And that a lot of kids, and now, that was my experience. And I try to impart that on the kids when, I've got a kid, and, especially when I was a teacher, a lot of the kids that well, how do I go play university football? And I said, well, man, I know what your grades are right now, but you're lucky because you're in grade 7. You got time. I was like, you got to start bringing the effort. And once you start bringing in that effort, you get your grades up. Sky's the limit, right? Mm-hmm. You can get faster. You can get stronger. Right? You can make yourself more attractive as an athlete. But if you have that academic piece blocking you, stopping you from moving forward, it's going to be very challenging to go to the next level in football.
I love it. And it sounds like, again, you're big on drawing attention back to habits, right? Like at the end, what are your daily habits? And I'm curious your perspective on this, because you spent time in education. As I was transitioning out, of education after 15 years, I started to, wonder what holds most students back, right? It's that pressure, right? Of I have to have a certain mark. I everyone wants to be doctors or lawyers, and there's that pressure. And then I start to ask the question, like, if we say that it's all about habits, wouldn't we put a greater emphasis, less emphasis on the mark, but more emphasis on the daily learning habits, the learning skills? Because really, if we emphasize that that's important, the learning skills, the daily habits, that the marks start to take care of itself. And the reality is, that's how you help people to maximize and reach their full potential.
Oh, for sure. And like, and not to mention, if you think about it through a professional lens, as an employer, who am I going to want to hire? Do I want somebody that got great marks in school because of, they have a great intellect and, they weren't very dedicated and didn't have great work habits? Or do I want somebody that's going to show up with their sleeves rolled up and their lunch pail and is ready to show up on time, to put in the effort, to manage their time properly, right? I'm going to want that person. I don't care what their marks were in school. It's funny, since I've been away from school, and my brothers as well, we've learned pretty quick that it doesn't really matter what degree you have, unless, you're a doctor or an engineer and, you're doing something where it's direct from your school of study, or sorry, your area of study to your job. But if you have a liberal arts degree, they're not going to care what you majored in or minored in. It's that degree is really to show them that you were able to do something for 4 years. You were able to manage your money and your time and finish something, and do something from start to finish. So it's funny you mentioned like we should be putting a bigger emphasis on those work habits, those study habits, right? Because like you said, if you take care of those, the grades take care of themselves. I remember that the kids that got the highest mark when I went, it was in high school, some of the kids that were, mid 70s, low 80s, but had phenomenal work habits are the ones that succeeded with phenomenal marks with 4.0 GPAs in university, because, they got to university and they were, they just kind of like, it was almost like they weren't first years. They hit the ground running in their first year because they knew how to cope in university. Yeah. And a lot of those kids that got off purely off, skill and natural intellect struggled mightily in those first couple of years because they weren't ready for the workload. They weren't ready to manage their time properly. So I totally agree with you, JT. I think realistically, like, school should be focusing more on those habits because that's how you succeed.
Well, and it's interesting how you share that, because I just think back to, I've 2 degrees. I have a teaching degree, and I no one's ever asked me for, what my marks were, and I've made a few career pivots. And it's interesting that I realized that it's not even the teaching degree. Like, the teaching degree allowed me, I get it, checked off some boxes, but really what's serving me now in my role, whether it's in my, coaching practice or in my role at Football Ontario, it's the skills I've developed by learning how to work with other people and how to like fall in love with helping others and serving others. Right. So it's, interesting food for thought of how we can grow and evolve moving forward.
Yeah. And that love for that happens through experience. It can happen in the classroom. That kind of piqued my interest. Like, I'd be interested in doing that. But really, until you get your hands dirty and you get involved, you don't really start to learn that. You learn that about yourself, and you go, "Oh, okay, this is my passion. This is what I love doing." And I find everything nowadays is so classroom based and so classroom oriented. It's like you said, checks in the box, right? It's a test. You got this done. Okay, check. But let's get these kids out in the real world experiencing things, and that's where you're really going to find, find what you love to do.
So I'm curious, as an Ontario guy, Northern Ontario guy, what has maybe been the biggest shift in your overall quality of life since going to the East Coast? Because, and I'll sort of preface this, that one thing that threw off some of our U16s last year when we were in Sackville was they're crossing the street, and some of the guys, especially from the big city centers, were waiting, and they're being mindful. They weren't crossing the street, and the people were stopping, and they almost didn't know what to do. And it took them a couple of days to get. So I love the quality of life over there. What has been the biggest blessing for you moving out and experiencing life on the East Coast?
So I would say, it's funny. Our family friend, Anthony Rhoda, he's the Speaker of the House right now in Parliament. And he told me when I moved over to New Brunswick, he said, "Jon, you're going to find that Northern Ontario has a lot more in common with New Brunswick than it does with Southern Ontario." And I learned that firsthand when I lived in Toronto. I've lived in Ottawa. I lived in Hamilton. And it's very busy, very fast there. And you're never short on something to do in those cities. But, it's chaotic. There's a lot going on. There's almost too much going on. And I will say, when I moved to New Brunswick, when I moved to New Brunswick, I was moving from Ottawa. I like rediscovered that piece of Northern Ontario.
Mm.
Like you said, people, in cars stopping, not at crosswalks to let you cross the road. It's a little slower out here in the best way possible. And it's the housing market's a little bit more manageable out here, which has been great because we're currently looking for a house.
Mm.
But realistically, I would say the best part of coming out here has been rediscovering that piece kind of that I had in Northern Ontario, that kind of that way of life, I should say.
Yeah, it's it was definitely interesting. There was a vibe. Again, for me, being a GTA guy growing up there, and then, London was a big, small city, but
Yeah.
I feel like I've always kind of been in more of these like, let's go, let's go. But there was something different. When I was in Sackville last year, I was like, it's nice to go out and there's just, I don't know, it just feels different. It's hard, it's not easy to articulate, but I know
Well, Sackville's a special place too. So even like Sackville, I even feel that when I go there from Moncton to Sackville. So Sackville's very small, a couple thousand people max, but it's extra sleepy in the summers because all the students are gone. Mount
yeah.
Allison University is, I think, 1,500 to 2,000. So essentially, the population doubles in the fall, winter, and spring, and then
Mhm.
goes back. It shrinks in size in the summer, and the summers in Sackville are just so relaxing.
Mhm.
Minus the fact that a monsoon could roll in from the coast at any second. But it's like you said, there's definitely a cool vibe in Sackville.
Yeah.
It's a really cool place.
Okay. So I'm curious, before we hopped on, I was mentioning that it's interesting because I think for outsiders, people think that football's on a decline, where it's actually, if I look at just our numbers provincially, I mean, we've almost doubled our membership coming out of the pandemic. I know you guys are growing as well. What are you noticing is happening? Because I feel like there's more collaboration going on coming out of the pandemic, and I feel like there's more PSOs coming together. I don't know, I just feel like there's more openness to collaborate and work together. Are you feeling that right now too?
100%. I mean, like, and it's funny, like, it's hard to hit the nail on the head here because it's like this feeling I've gotten since I've been involved with Football New Brunswick. It was like there's something special going on here with football. It's and I've had chats with you guys at Football Ontario. I've been working with Mike Thomas at Football Saskatchewan, and like everybody's like, let's grow this sport because I think everybody that gets involved with football at this level obviously loves the sport. And now obviously I'm incredibly biased, but I think football is the best sport in the world.
Mhm.
Like as a team sport, like I've never seen a sport bring people together like football and bring communities together too. And the more
Mhm.
people we get involved, and it's funny, somebody was just telling me a story about Scott McNamee, one of our regional technical directors, lives in St. John. He was in the grocery store or Staples or something. He just sees this kid and he's like, that kid looks like he'd be a good football player. And he goes and starts talking to him, and some of the kids, I didn't even know football was available here. Like I didn't know I could play it.
Mhm.
And he got the kid involved and the kid's obsessed with it now. And I can't tell you, and especially with the girl stuff going on right now.
Mhm.
Like when I was working as a teacher and I was still kind of involved, I was coaching with Football New Brunswick when I was teaching. So I wasn't in this position. But I would tell some of the girls like, yeah, we have like a female U18 provincial team. And they would like, what? I was like, yeah, and we also have a varsity league too. So you can play for the Moncton Stingrays or the Fredericton Predators. They were blown away, and they couldn't believe that there was this opportunity, this kind of space for females to play high level competitive football. And all of a
Mhm.
sudden, it's just like more. They talk to their friends, and I'm having students I've never met come up to me in the hallway. Hey, tell me about this. This football program you guys have. So I really do feel a growth. And ever since I've gotten involved as a director of football operations here, it's been one of the greatest pleasures in this job so far is having parents come up to me and oh, thank you so much for the programming. It has changed my kid. My kid all of a sudden cares about school. He's working hard. He's getting up in the mornings. Nothing makes me happier than hearing about kids that have used football as a springboard to become a better person in life. So,
Mhm.
like, I totally agree. Football is on the up. I think people kind of think it's shrinking because of I don't know why. I think for a long time we've had a stigma in our sport with the concussion stuff, but I think safe contacts really helped us with that. Football Canada has done a great job at getting that stigma out of the sport. And people are realizing that there are other sports with head injuries too. It's kind of a universal thing, right? You get your head hit, hit hard enough, there's probably a concussion, but we are doing great things in football to take the head out of, the hit and make it safer for everybody. And I think people are probably starting to realize that and are starting to either come back to the sport or come to it for the first time.
Yeah. I love everything you shared there. And it sort of reminded me that that's one of the beauties, right? And I know I'm sort of preaching the choir here with one of the beauties of football is it really does celebrate diversity, right? Like you
Oh my
can,
God, yeah.
I mean, you can have, 330-pound linemen, but then have 150-pound DBs, right? It doesn't matter what neighborhood you grew up, what the color of your skin is. Like it really is one of those that promotes, diversity. And the other part of where it's different, and my wife was also an educator. She was a volleyball coach, right? And she said, at a great school, if you don't come from a club volleyball background, you're not making that team in high school. Where football is one of those kind of late specialization sports where you can come from different sports and different skill sets, and there's a place really for everyone.
Oh my God, big time. I just thought of a couple stories actually. So I also coach at Riverview High School here in Riverview is basically I might get, shot for saying this, but pretty much a part of Moncton. But it's just across the river from Moncton. And I tease my fiance all the time. I say Riverview is pretty much Moncton. She gets pretty upset about that. It's its own thing. So, but yeah, we had a guy this year, Rowan Hopper, AAA hockey player his whole life. Finally, he's kind of like, I think I'm done with hockey, playing at that level at least. And, some of his buddies are on our team. And he said, come on out for the football team. And this kid's like 6'1", like 220, like built to play football. And he comes out, and now mind you, this was a hand time. It wasn't laser, but he ran like a 4.6 or like a 4.7 or something. And we're like, dude, come on. So we started him off at linebacker, and I remember we ran a jet, and he was playing Mike, and he over pursued on a jet playing for Mike. So we're like, okay, this kid's got wheels. Linebacker was a little much, but we put him in at 3-tech. And first couple weeks, he didn't really shine too much, but man, mid-season, this kid was destroying. And it was just like you said, it's a late split. Like anybody can kind of join up, and all of a sudden, like you go from never having played a down of football in your life to being a starter on it. We won the provincial championship this year. So being a starter on the best high school football team in the province. So like what a jump, right? And to speak to the uniqueness of the sport, we've converted a lot of hockey players to football players. One of our, my boundary corner, I got him for one more year, Alex Whalen, growing up always a hockey player, right? And so I remember, I forget who, I think he told our head coach this, but he couldn't believe he said it was so weird. After we won, he was like bawling his eyes out and hugging his friends and telling, I love you, man, I love you. And after reflecting on it, I guess he said, coach, it was so weird, man. Like that doesn't happen in hockey. Like I've never cried after a big win and gone and hugged my friends and told them how much I love them. And I was like, man, yeah, you know what? I've experienced the same thing growing up. That is unique to football, I find. This, like, all of a sudden, like the tears start flowing, and it's, I love you this, I love you that. And it was really funny to hear kind of these kids that have never really experienced football up until high school. All of a sudden, they're like, and now they are hooked. They are like, they still play high school hockey, but they've moved away from the competitive stuff in the city. Mm-hmm. And I've got like 3 or 4 of them that are all in and trying to play at the next level. And it just makes me smile.
Yeah, it's interesting as you were sharing like that. There is sort of like that culture of love where it's like, hey, you don't see it in many other sports, and it just sort of reminded me that I feel like whenever I'm at events and you see some of these these big burly football coaches, how many hugs I get. I'm like, yeah, it's really interesting, right? There's not many other vocations where you're going to hug another strong and powerful man, right? It's just like that's just part of the culture.
Very true. Very true.
Okay. So I'm curious, as a leader at the provincial level, and I would say at the national level, what would you like to see happen? Like we've had a lot of wins, especially coming out of the last few years, of just shutdowns. What would you like to see happen to really take the game to the next level, either provincially or nationally?
I think one of them, and I've talked about it with my players. They asked us, why is there an Eastern and Western Challenge for U16? And because they're greedy. They want to be in a national tournament at a younger age too. I think it'd be really cool to eventually see and I know that takes time, but I would love to see a U16 national championship. I would love to. I think that would be very, very cool. Another thing, I would just love to find a way, and this is one of the things that I struggle right now. Well, I wouldn't say struggle, but one of the challenges in my job is finding ways to reach people that don't know about football or haven't been able to experience that. Is so I'll tell you, in New Brunswick, anything north of Miramichi, really, we don't really have much of a footprint with football. And we're trying to find ways to kind of get involved and spread awareness of like, hey, this is a great sport. You got to come out and try it. And one tool we're going to use is flag football, because we think, for very small towns, it's a great way to get started. You don't need much to start playing, right? You need less kids. And maybe that over a couple of years grows into all of a sudden, hey, we want the full enchilada. We want the helmets. We want the shoulder pads, right? So I would love to just see it kind of, and I don't know if we'll ever reach the level of popularity of hockey in this country, but I would love to see football start to just kind of get to that point where if I'm born in Canada, I just know that football is a sport I can play. I know there are opportunities for football. And my last thing I'd like to see is I would love to see the CJFL come out east. I think it would be great to have some CJFL action out in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI, Newfoundland, if possible. One thing I found, we had a bunch of kids this year on our high school team that, like absolutely fell in love with football. A couple of them that I think, could crack most rosters across youth sport. Zero interest in going to university, which I respect, because they want to go be, underwater welders and make the big bucks. They want to be HVAC technicians, which, nowadays that's incredibly smart because we got a big need for that. But it broke my heart when I told them, well, you know what, like, there's not, well, there's a couple, opportunities where you can continue to play out here, but that kind of like, and I don't have a word for it because I miss it now as a coach. And when I was a player, that need to win, like when you played in yo-yo, you know what I mean? Like that, it's almost like you feel like you're playing in the show. Like it's not you're having fun for sure, but like if you don't win, like you're pissed off about it. That competitiveness, that like all or nothingness, right? And to be in a league like that while still being able to pursue your professional goals. So I told him, you could maybe move to Ontario or out west and play in the CJFL out there. But as far as kind of a youth sports equivalent for college, we don't really have anything. And I would love to see us, well, out east, we don't have that at least. And I would love to have that opportunity for the kids out east to continue playing football while, like I said, pursuing their professional goals.
I love it. And it sounds like it's more about just creating more alignment in the pathway, right? Because as the pathway becomes more aligned, as there's next steps in that pathway, then it's really long-term athlete development, right? It's keeping them in the pathway so they stay active, so that again they get these lessons from sport and physical activity throughout their life.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So I'm curious, brother, you've definitely sparked my interest. Is there anything, someone's listening to this, wants to learn more about, what you're helping to grow, what Football New Brunswick is willing to grow? What's the best way that they can sort of follow your journey or the PSO's journey?
Sure. So we got a brand new awesome site for Football New Brunswick, footballnb.ca. Okay. Check us out there. We're pretty active on social media. I'll get our actual handle here for you. 2 seconds here. And if people want to follow me, my account's open as well. So it's Football NB, all one word, on Instagram. And then if they want to follow me, it's Coach_Wilkie. They can always shoot me an email. My contact info is there. I love to get people involved with football. I'm always looking for coaches if they're, within New Brunswick, unless they want to move from another province like I did and come out here. I can't offer you work just yet, but I could definitely try and find you a spot as a coach. But yeah, like I'm very easily accessed via social media, emails, phone calls, whatever. Reach out to me and we can chat for sure.
Absolutely. And I'll be happy to share any of those handles in the description on the podcast or on YouTube or on Facebook. Interestingly enough, we facilitated a coaching clinic in conjunction with the Vanier Cup last year. And we actually had a coach from Ontario that was moving out to New Brunswick. So, I think there are some people that are going out there. So it just kind of made me thought maybe it's an opportunity, that if he's listening to this, to again, opportunity is always
Reach
around,
out.
right?
We'll find you a spot. I need a DB coach right now. So if you're listening, reach out to me and we'll find you a spot for sure.
Absolutely. So, Jonathan, I just really want to take a moment to acknowledge you. I want to take a moment to acknowledge you for the great partner you are, the great dad, the great teacher, coach, mentor, but more importantly, the amazing human being you are. The one thing I've definitely received from this conversation is how just this idea that every experience in your life is preparing you for something greater. And everything about your journey to greatness reminds me of that. So I just want to thank you for blessing me with that simple reminder and just inspiring me to keep taking those steps along my journey. So thank you for that, brother.
Absolutely, JT. It was an absolute pleasure being on here. And anytime you want to chat, I love talking football. I love talking, about the journey to greatness and continuing down that journey. So, it's been a pleasure talking to you, man. And yeah, anytime you want me back on, I'm game.
Yeah, absolutely. So, folks, Jonathan dropped so many valuable nuggets of wisdom that will not only help you succeed in sport, but more importantly, in the game of life. But as I like to remind you every week in the huddle, knowledge is potential power. It's the consistent and focused application of great knowledge that actually creates great results. So my challenge to you is to take one of these valuable nuggets of wisdom and go apply it to your life today. And as I like to remind you every week in the huddle, you are deserving of greatness. You are worthy of greatness. You are greatness. And my only ask from these conversations is, if it touched your heart, if it resonated with you, then please share it with a friend, a loved one, a teammate, just someone you feel would benefit from this conversation. The more people we have listening, understanding, and applying these simple, these positive, inspiring, empowering ideas in their life, the more blessed this world will be. As always, I love having these conversations with you, and I look forward to chatting with you next time in the huddle. Have a great day, everyone.